If this story moves you, drop a heart in the comments. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Willowbrook Wildlife Rehabilitation Center as Dr. Marcus Chin pulled into the gravel parking lot, his coffee still steaming in the cup holder. 23 years of veterinary practice had taught him to expect the unexpected, but nothing could have prepared him for what awaited him inside the recovery ward that Tuesday morning. Sarah Martinez, the center's lead rehabilitator, met him at the entrance with an expression that mixed bewilderment with concern. Her usually steady hands trembled slightly as she gestured toward the back building where they housed their most critical patients. "Marcus, you need to see this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been working with wildlife for 15 years, and I've never witnessed anything quite like what's happening in there." They walked together down the familiar hallway lined with recovery enclosures, past the usual morning sounds of chirping songbirds and rustling mammals. But as they approached the large flight cage at the end of the corridor, an unusual quiet had settled over the space. Inside the spacious enclosure, a sight that defied every principle of natural animal behavior unfolded before them. Liberty, a juvenile bald eagle who had arrived 3 weeks earlier with a severely damaged wing and deep psychological trauma, sat hunched in the corner of the cage. Her magnificent head, crowned with the brown feathers that would eventually turn white with maturity, was tucked low against her chest. Soft, plaintive cries escaped her beak in irregular intervals, each sound carrying the weight of profound distress. But what stopped Dr. Chin in his tracks wasn't the eagle's obvious emotional pain. It was the large golden retriever pressed against the outside of the enclosure, his massive frame somehow contorted to fit as much of himself as possible against the wire mesh. The dog's front paws were stretched through the gaps in the fencing, and his entire body seemed to vibrate with an urgent need to comfort the distressed bird. "This is Max," Sarah explained quietly. "He belongs to Tom Peterson, one of our volunteers. Tom brought him in yesterday when he came to help with the morning feeding, and Max immediately gravitated toward Liberty's enclosure. We thought it was just curiosity at first, but he's been here for over 18 hours now. He won't eat, won't drink, and he refuses to leave her side." Dr. Chin knelt beside the enclosure, studying the unusual pair. Max's brown eyes were fixed intently on the young eagle, and every few minutes he would emit a soft whine that seemed to match the rhythm of Liberty's cries. When the eagle would shift position or cry out more intensely, Max would press himself even closer to the mesh, his tail wagging in slow, deliberate movements that spoke of deep concern rather than playful excitement. "Has anyone tried to separate them?" Dr. Chin asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Tom tried to take Max home last night," Sarah replied. "The dog became so agitated that we were worried he might hurt himself. He scratched at the doors, howled continuously, and refused to be consoled. We finally had to let him stay. Tom slept in the office so Max wouldn't be alone, but the dog never left this spot." Dr. Chin observed the pair for several more minutes, noting the synchronization of their behaviors. When Liberty would settle slightly, Max's breathing would slow to match hers. When she cried out, his whines would intensify proportionally. It was as if they were engaged in some form of interspecies communication that transcended the normal boundaries between predator and prey. "Tell me about Liberty's background again," Dr. Chin requested, pulling up a small stool to sit beside the enclosure. Sarah consulted her clipboard, though she knew the details by heart. She was found by hikers in the Cascade Mountains 3 weeks ago, estimated to be about 4 months old, just learning to fly when the incident occurred. Park rangers believe her nest was destroyed in a severe storm, and she fell approximately 60 feet. The impact shattered her left wing in 3 places and caused significant soft tissue damage. And her behavior since arrival? Extremely withdrawn. She barely eats, shows no interest in her surroundings, and hasn't made any attempts at the flight exercises we typically start at this stage of recovery. Dr. Williams from the Avian Clinic said her wing has healed remarkably well from a physical standpoint, but emotionally. Sarah trailed off, gesturing toward the huddled bird. Dr. Chin nodded thoughtfully. He had seen similar cases before, though never quite this severe. Young eagles who experienced traumatic separations from their parents often developed what could only be described as a form of depression. In the wild, eagle parents maintained close bonds with their offspring for months, teaching them essential survival skills and providing emotional security during their vulnerable early development. "She's grieving," he said simply. "The physical trauma was just the beginning. She lost her parents, her siblings if she had any, her territory, everything familiar. For a young eagle, that kind of loss can be devastating." As if responding to his words, Liberty let out a particularly mournful cry that seemed to echo off the walls of the enclosure. Max immediately pressed his nose against the mesh and released a soft, rumbling whine that carried an unmistakable tone of comfort and reassurance. "It's almost like he understands exactly what she's going through," Sarah observed, watching the golden retriever's gentle response. Dr. Chen found himself thinking about Max's own history. Tom Peterson had rescued the dog from a shelter 5 years earlier, and the story of Max's early life had become something of a legend among the Wildlife Center's volunteers. Max had been found as a young puppy, abandoned in a cardboard box by the side of a rural highway during a winter storm. He had been alone, cold, and crying when a passing motorist discovered him and brought him to the animal shelter. The parallels between Max's experience and Liberty's current situation were striking. Both had been separated from their families at a vulnerable age, both had experienced trauma and abandonment, and both had required the intervention of caring humans to survive. "I want to try something unconventional," Dr. Chen announced after a long period of observation. "I know it goes against standard protocol, but I think Max might be exactly what Liberty needs right now." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You're thinking of allowing direct contact?" "Not immediately, but I want to see how they respond to closer proximity. Can we set up a smaller enclosure adjacent to Liberty's cage? Something that would allow them to be near each other without the risk of physical harm." Within an hour, the staff had constructed a temporary pen using portable fencing panels, creating a space where Max could lie comfortably while remaining close to Liberty's enclosure. The moment they opened the gate to allow Max inside, his entire demeanor changed. His tail began wagging with genuine enthusiasm for the first time since his vigil had begun, and he immediately settled into a position where he could maintain visual contact with the young eagle. Liberty's response was equally remarkable. Her cries, which had been continuous and increasingly distressed throughout the morning, began to soften. She lifted her head slightly and turned toward Max, studying him with what appeared to be curiosity rather than fear. Over the next several hours, Dr. Chen and Sarah took turns monitoring the pair. Max seemed to have an intuitive understanding of what Liberty needed. When she appeared agitated, he would lie very still and emit soft, rhythmic breathing sounds that seemed to calm her. When she showed signs of interest in her surroundings, he would become more animated, wagging his tail and making gentle play movements that encouraged her engagement. By evening, Liberty had eaten her first full meal since arriving at the center. She had also begun to move around her enclosure more freely, no longer confining herself to the corner where she had spent the previous 3 weeks. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Chen murmured to Sarah as they watched Liberty actually attempt a few tentative wing stretches. "I've never seen an eagle respond to cross-species companionship like this." Tom Peterson arrived for his evening volunteer shift to find his dog transformed. Max greeted his owner with enthusiasm but made it clear that he had no intention of leaving Liberty's side. After a brief discussion with Dr. Chen and Sarah, Tom agreed to an extended arrangement that would allow Max to continue his unusual role as emotional support companion. "If it's helping her heal, then Max and I are committed to seeing this through," Tom said, scratching behind his dog's ears. "He's always had a special way with animals in distress. I just never imagined it would extend to something like this." The following days brought continued progress. Liberty began participating in the gentle flight exercises that were crucial to her rehabilitation. With Max lying quietly nearby, she would spread her wings and practice the movements that would eventually allow her to return to the wild. Her appetite improved dramatically, and she began showing interest in the various enrichment activities the staff provided. Dr. Chen documented everything meticulously, knowing that this case would likely be studied by wildlife rehabilitators for years to come. The bond between Max and Liberty was unlike anything in the scientific literature, and the therapeutic benefits were undeniable. On the 5th day of their unconventional partnership, something extraordinary happened. Dr. Chen arrived at the center to find Liberty perched on one of the higher branches in her enclosure, her posture alert and confident for the first time since her arrival. Max was lying in his adjacent pen, but instead of the anxious vigilance that had characterized his previous behavior, he appeared relaxed and content. "She's been like that since dawn," Sarah reported excitedly. "Strong, alert, engaged with her environment. And look at this." She led Dr. Chen to the feeding station inside Liberty's enclosure. The young eagle had not only eaten her entire meal but had also begun caching extra food, a behavior that indicated she was thinking about future needs rather than simply surviving moment to moment. "She's planning ahead," Dr. Chen observed with amazement. "That's a crucial cognitive shift. She's moved from survival mode to recovery mode." As they watched, Liberty caught sight of them through the mesh and instead of retreating, she maintained her position and studied them with keen interest. Her eyes, which had been dull and unfocused for weeks, now held the sharp intelligence characteristic of healthy eagles. Max seemed to sense the change in his companion as well. His tail wagged gently, and he made a soft sound that could only be described as approval and encouragement. The breakthrough continued over the following week. Liberty began engaging in more complex behaviors, including play activities and exploratory movements around her enclosure. She started responding to the staff members who worked with her, showing recognition and even what appeared to be affection for Sarah and Dr. Chen. But perhaps most remarkably, she began to communicate with Max in ways that suggested a sophisticated understanding of their relationship. When Max would arrive each morning, Liberty would call out to him with specific vocalizations that were distinctly different from her distress cries. When he settled into his pen, she would position herself where she could maintain visual contact with him throughout the day. Dr. Chen found himself spending increasing amounts of time observing their interactions, fascinated by the complexity of their bond. He began to notice subtle patterns in their communication that suggested they had developed their own unique language of comfort and companionship. "I think we need to start considering the next phase of Liberty's rehabilitation," he told Sarah during one of their morning briefings. "Her wing strength is excellent, her flight responses are developing well, and her psychological state has improved dramatically. But we need to think carefully about how to transition her toward eventual release while maintaining the emotional stability that Max has helped her achieve." The challenge was significant. Traditional eagle rehabilitation involved gradually reducing human contact and encouraging the bird's natural wariness of other species. But Liberty's recovery had been so closely tied to her relationship with Max that separating them too quickly could potentially undo all the progress they had made. Dr. Chen decided to consult with Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a specialist in animal psychology who had worked extensively with trauma recovery in wildlife. After reviewing the documentation and observing Liberty and Max together, Dr. Rodriguez provided insights that would prove crucial to the next phase of rehabilitation. "What we're seeing here is a form of interspecies attachment that has served a therapeutic function," she explained. "Max has essentially become a surrogate family member for Liberty, providing the emotional security she needed to begin healing from her trauma. The challenge now is to help her generalize that sense of security so she can function independently in the wild." Dr. Rodriguez recommended a gradual transition process that would slowly increase Liberty's independence while maintaining her connection to Max. The plan involved expanding Liberty's flight space, introducing her to other eagles when possible, and gradually reducing the amount of time she spent in direct proximity to Max. The first phase of this transition began with the construction of a larger flight enclosure that would allow Liberty to practice more complex aerial maneuvers. Max's pen was repositioned so he could still see her but from a greater distance, encouraging Liberty to venture further from her comfort zone. Initially, Liberty showed some anxiety about the increased distance from Max, but the golden retriever seemed to understand his role in encouraging her independence. Instead of the constant vigilance he had maintained during her acute recovery phase, Max began spending portions of each day engaged in other activities while still maintaining his overall presence in the area. Liberty's response to this gradual independence was remarkable. She began spending more time in flight, practicing increasingly complex maneuvers and building the strength and confidence she would need for life in the wild. Her hunting instincts, which had been completely suppressed during her depression, began to emerge as she started showing interest in the live fish that were occasionally introduced to her enclosure. Dr. Chen documented each milestone with growing excitement. Liberty was not just recovering. She was thriving in ways that exceeded their most optimistic projections. Her physical capabilities were approaching those of a wild eagle her age, and her psychological resilience had been rebuilt through her unique relationship with Max. As Liberty's independence grew, something beautiful began to happen in their relationship. Rather than becoming distant from Max, she began to interact with him from a position of strength rather than dependence. She would fly to the section of her enclosure closest to his pen and engage in what could only be described as playful interactions, diving and swooping in patterns that seemed designed to entertain and engage her canine friend. Max, for his part, had evolved from a concerned caregiver to an enthusiastic supporter. He would watch Liberty's flight exercises with obvious pride, his tail wagging vigorously when she executed particularly impressive maneuvers. The anxiety and urgency that had characterized his early vigil had been replaced by joy and celebration of her progress. 3 months after Max had first refused to leave Liberty's side, Dr. Chen made the decision that both thrilled and saddened everyone at the center. Liberty was ready for release preparation, the final phase of her rehabilitation before returning to the wild. The release preparation process typically took several weeks and involved moving eagles to outdoor flight enclosures that more closely resembled their natural habitat. It was designed to help them readjust to natural weather patterns, wild food sources, and the absence of human presence. For Liberty, this transition presented unique challenges because of her bond with Max. Dr. Chen and his team developed a carefully structured plan that would honor their relationship while preparing Liberty for independent life in the wild. The outdoor flight enclosure was situated in a wooded area of the Wildlife Center's property, surrounded by tall trees and natural vegetation. Max's temporary pen was positioned at the edge of this area, close enough for Liberty to see him, but far enough to encourage her to explore her expanded territory. The first day in the outdoor enclosure marked another breakthrough in Liberty's recovery. Surrounded by natural sights, sounds, and smells, she seemed to remember instincts that had been dormant since her trauma. She spent hours exploring every branch, testing air currents, and practicing hunting techniques on artificial prey. Max watched these activities with what appeared to be deep satisfaction. His role had clearly shifted from protector to proud supporter, and he seemed to understand that Liberty's growing independence was a positive development rather than a rejection of their bond. As the days passed, Liberty began spending longer periods away from the section of the enclosure closest to Max, venturing into the far reaches of her territory and engaging in behaviors that indicated she was preparing mentally for life beyond the rehabilitation center. Dr. Chen observed these changes with mixed emotions. Liberty's recovery was a tremendous success story, but he found himself surprisingly affected by the impending separation of the unlikely pair who had taught him so much about healing, resilience, and the power of interspecies compassion. The final phase of release preparation involved reducing and eventually eliminating human contact with Liberty while monitoring her behavior to ensure she maintained her natural wariness of people. This process typically took 2 to 3 weeks, during which the eagle would demonstrate her readiness for independent survival. Liberty exceeded all expectations during this period. She successfully caught live fish introduced to her enclosure, demonstrated excellent flight skills, and showed appropriate caution around human observers. Her transformation from the traumatized, withdrawn bird who had arrived months earlier was complete. Throughout this final preparation phase, Max continued his supportive presence, but even he seemed to understand that their time together was drawing to a close. His behavior became less focused on constant vigilance and more oriented toward what could only be described as encouragement and celebration of Liberty's achievements. Dr. Chen scheduled the release for a clear morning in early autumn, when weather conditions would be optimal for Liberty's first flight into the wild. The location chosen was a protected area of national forest known to support a healthy eagle population, giving Liberty the best possible chance of finding her place in the natural community. The night before the release, Dr. Chen found himself making one final observation of Max and Liberty together. The golden retriever was lying peacefully in his pen, occasionally looking up at Liberty, who was perched high in her enclosure, alert and ready for the adventure that awaited her. As Dr. Chen watched, Liberty flew down to the section of mesh closest to Max and made a series of soft vocalizations that seemed distinctly different from any sounds she had made before. Max responded with gentle whines and tail movements that suggested he understood the significance of the moment. "They're saying goodbye," Sarah observed, joining Dr. Chen in his quiet vigil. "They both know what's coming." The morning of the release dawned crisp and clear, with gentle winds that would provide perfect flying conditions. Dr. Chen, Sarah, Tom, and several other staff members gathered at the release site, along with Max, who had been brought to witness Liberty's return to freedom. The transport carrier containing Liberty was positioned in a clearing surrounded by tall pines, with a clear flight path in multiple directions. Max was kept at a distance that would allow him to see the release but wouldn't interfere with Liberty's natural instincts. When Dr. Chen opened the carrier door, Liberty emerged with a confidence and dignity that spoke of her complete recovery. She paused for a moment, surveying her surroundings with the keen intelligence of a wild eagle. Then she turned toward the group of humans and, remarkably, toward Max. For several seconds, eagle and dog maintained eye contact across the clearing. Liberty's posture was proud and strong, no longer the broken, frightened bird who had needed Max's comfort to survive. Max's tail wagged slowly, and his expression conveyed what could only be described as pride and love. Then Liberty spread her magnificent wings, now fully healed and powerful, and launched herself into the morning sky. She circled the clearing once, twice, 3 times, gaining altitude with each pass. On her final circle, she flew directly over Max, calling out with a sound that echoed through the forest. Max watched until Liberty disappeared beyond the tree line, his tail still wagging gently. When Tom approached to leash him for the journey home, the golden retriever took one last look at the sky where his friend had vanished, then walked calmly toward the truck. As Dr. Chin drove back to the Wildlife Center, he found himself reflecting on the extraordinary journey he had witnessed. The relationship between Max and Liberty had defied conventional understanding of animal behavior and had resulted in one of the most successful rehabilitation cases in his career. But more than that, their bond had demonstrated something profound about the capacity for healing, compassion, and connection that exists across species boundaries. Max's instinctive understanding of Liberty's trauma and his unwavering commitment to her recovery had created a therapeutic relationship that no human intervention could have replicated. In the weeks following Liberty's release, Max returned to his normal routine as Tom's companion and occasional volunteer assistant at the Wildlife Center. But staff members noticed subtle changes in the golden retriever's behavior around other injured animals. He seemed to have developed an enhanced sensitivity to distress and a remarkable ability to provide comfort to creatures in need. Dr. Chin began documenting these observations, wondering if Max's experience with Liberty had awakened or enhanced natural therapeutic instincts that could be beneficial in future rehabilitation cases. The possibility of incorporating specially trained companion animals into wildlife rehabilitation programs was an intriguing prospect that warranted further study. 3 months after her release, Liberty was spotted by park rangers in the area where she had been freed. She appeared healthy, strong, and well integrated into the local eagle population. The rangers reported that she had been observed hunting successfully and interacting normally with other eagles, indicating that her rehabilitation had been completely successful. When Dr. Chin shared this news with Tom and Max, the golden retriever's response was remarkable. His tail wagged with obvious joy, and he made soft sounds of contentment that suggested he somehow understood that his friend was thriving in her natural home. The story of Max and Liberty spread throughout the wildlife rehabilitation community, inspiring new approaches to trauma recovery in rescued animals. Dr. Chin was invited to present their case at several professional conferences, where the response from colleagues was universally positive and deeply moved. But perhaps the most significant impact of their story was on the people who had witnessed their bond firsthand. Sarah found herself approaching her work with renewed faith in the healing power of compassion and connection. Tom gained a deeper appreciation for his dog's remarkable empathy and began volunteering more regularly at the center, bringing Max along when appropriate. For Dr. Chin, the experience had been transformative in ways he was still discovering. After more than 2 decades of veterinary practice, he had thought he understood the complexities of animal behavior and the challenges of wildlife rehabilitation. Max and Liberty had shown him that there were still mysteries to explore, connections to discover, and healing modalities that transcended traditional scientific understanding. As he sat in his office one evening, reviewing the extensive documentation of Liberty's case, Dr. Chin found himself thinking about the moment when he had first seen Max pressed against Liberty's enclosure, refusing to leave her side. At the time, it had seemed like an interesting behavioral anomaly. Now he understood it as something far more profound. Max had recognized a kindred spirit in Liberty, another creature who had experienced abandonment and trauma at a vulnerable age. His response had been immediate and instinctive, driven by an empathy that transcended species differences and conventional predator-prey relationships. The golden retriever's commitment to Liberty's healing had been absolute and unwavering. He had provided exactly what she needed when she needed it, adapting his support as she grew stronger and more independent. When the time came for her to return to the wild, he had celebrated her freedom rather than mourning their separation. Dr. Chin realized that Max had demonstrated a form of love that was both selfless and wise, understanding that true caring sometimes meant letting go. The dog's ability to provide comfort without creating dependence, to offer support while encouraging independence, represented a sophisticated understanding of the healing process that impressed even experienced professionals. As the months passed and new animals arrived at the rehabilitation center, the staff often found themselves thinking about the lessons learned from Max and Liberty's extraordinary relationship. Their story had become a touchstone for approaching difficult cases with creativity, compassion, and openness to unconventional solutions. The bond between a golden retriever and a bald eagle had challenged assumptions, inspired innovation, and ultimately saved a life that might otherwise have been lost to trauma and despair. In doing so, it had also touched the lives of everyone who witnessed their connection, reminding them of the profound healing power that exists when one being recognizes the pain of another and chooses to offer comfort without reservation. Years later, when Dr. Chen would tell the story of Max and Liberty to new staff members or visiting students, he would always end with the same observation. The most powerful medicine, he would say, is often the simplest, the presence of another being who understands suffering and chooses to stay, to comfort, and to believe in the possibility of healing. In a world where wildlife faces increasing challenges from habitat loss, climate change, and human encroachment, the story of Max and Liberty offered hope and inspiration. It demonstrated that healing and recovery are possible, that connections can form across seemingly impossible boundaries, and that sometimes the most effective therapy comes not from medical intervention but from the simple act of refusing to let another being suffer alone. The golden retriever who wouldn't leave a crying eagle's side had shown everyone at the Willowbrook Wildlife Rehabilitation Center that love, patience, and unwavering presence could work miracles. In doing so, Max had not only saved Liberty's life but had also expanded everyone's understanding of what was possible when compassion transcended the boundaries of species, expectation, and conventional wisdom.